Congresswoman and a doctor. I'm always reminded she's a doctor. She's a very, very smart lady in her own right. On Ann Hayworth, and I'm not saying just being a congresswoman is not being proof that you're smart.
You could argue that.
I have to dial that one back.
You could argue that one, yeah.
And last but not least, after the Bell co-host Conal McShane, Dr. Congresswoman, let me get your take on this sort of perfect mix report that we got that got a lot of this buying going.
Especially as we head into the 2020, we're in the 2020 political cycle. Tax cuts and deregulation work. I think that is the overwhelming message of today. Markets, of course, as we know, go up and down. They're substantially emotionally driven. That's why presidents should never point to the markets.
Don't marry yourself one way or the other.
Don't marry yourself to the markets. But we know this economy is driving forward, and it is because, and we hear it from entrepreneurs, we hear it from job creators, we hear it from working Americans. The business climate is tangibly better than it was under President Obama and the Democrats.
Well, I mean, this is the 100th month, was it, John, of job gains? Yeah. We've seen, the worrier in everyone, whether you credit this president or the prior president, is that's a long recovery and that's a long job spurt. And you always wait, God, can we keep it going?
Yeah, it stretches all the way back through the Obama administrations. No, this was a good jobs report. It not only showed jobs being created, but it showed more people coming in that had kind of left the workforce. It showed wages rising. That's really good.
Good enough, I think, to get the Federal Reserve's attention now to hold off?
Well, but the Federal Reserve had weighed in a day before, right?
Yeah.
And sort of signaled, or a couple of days before, signaled that they are going to hold off a little bit, and they were backtracking a bit, and you have to wonder why. So what data are they looking at that says they're concerned about a slowdown in the future? They're concerned about those tax cuts, perhaps leading to rising deficits in this country, rising debt in this country.
Spending is the main driver, though. We know that.
But the tax cuts had a piece of it. So what
would they have known, by the way, the broad parameters of the jobs news when they were talking a couple of days ago?
They could have, and you would have thought that would have led them to not say anything, right? Because this is a robust economy, and the Fed had every sort of right to come down on this as, look, we're going to keep on the table 3 rate cuts, 3 rate decreases, 2 rate increases next year, but they didn't do that. They signaled to the market that we're going to hold back a bit. Maybe they see these trade negotiations with China not working to the economic advantage of the U.S. Maybe they see something else out there they're concerned about.
What do you think?
Well, whatever they see, I think the big picture kind of theme of what we're seeing today and what we've seen in the data recently is it kind of adjusts our time frame for everything. So I don't think it necessarily changes the what, but it does change the when on certain things. So like, say, for example, at the end of last year, everybody was talking about when the economy would slow down. Was it an early 2019 story, late 2019, sometime in 2020? Whatever your view on that was, now it's being pushed back a little bit, which I think affects our kind of day-to-day life. But to the point Nan was making a few minutes ago, it also affects our politics heading into 2020.
But now I'm thinking, come to that point. If forget about what the Fed might think or rethink, and to John's point, it might have had this factored in. But now the markets are going to think, and it's not evident today so far, maybe you risk getting behind the curve here.
I think there's a reason it's not evident today so far, because like anyone you talk to thinks that the Federal Reserve, even if they're going to kind of make that pivot to raising rates again, is not going to do that tomorrow. They're not going to do that next week, probably not even going to do it next month, because if you're the Fed and you
But the markets don't expect any move this year. Right?
Exactly. But so just say for argument's sake, they bought themselves 6 months, not even bought themselves, but almost kind of guaranteed, almost painted themselves back into a corner, because the criticism of the Federal Reserve was that they were kind of in the president's pocket or whatever the case may be, and they were kind of following what he was doing. Now, what are you going to say if you're Jerome Powell? I'm patient, and then 2 days later this report comes out saying, well, I've lost all my patience. It's like you can't really do it now. So I think the market is looking at this and saying we've bought ourselves time.
All this what was startling about this report, Nan, is that it occurred in the shutdown month. So much of the government was shut down throughout the months, effectively. And we had this robust growth. Now, I'm wondering, given the ongoing talks, in 2 weeks we could be facing all this all over again. Then what?
Look, we know that shutting down the federal government does cause jitters. I don't think it redounds particularly to the political benefit of either side to.
Do you think it's going to
go toward a
happen
shutdown.
again, or do you think the president declares an emergency?
I think the president would declare a state of emergency before he would pursue a shutdown. And at that point, with another caravan approaching, with the enormous fentanyl bust that they just had, I think the president would have some justification for saying, look, we have a crisis here that I am compelled to address. The Democrats won't do it. And it's going to be in
But he'll be doing that for the State of the Union on Tuesday, right? With Nancy Pelosi right behind him making faces, right?
Yes. You just summed it up. That's exactly what's going to happen. Connell's right. I mean, I think that
Connell does that to me, and it's embarrassing.
I was about to use the same joke as like one of your.
I think the markets may be kind of cottoning on to this notion that some time has been bought for the Fed, but also perhaps in these negotiations with China, which has also thrown the market off. Not a lot of progress is being made. China's coming back to the table saying we want to buy our way out of this problem. We want to, buy a couple more soybeans from you, a little bit more LNG. Back off from what the demands really are, which is to change the way we do business. We can't steal.
Who needs it more, John? I always go back and forth with this with you. Who needs a deal more? I used to think China needed more than we did. Sometimes, I don't know, we could use it too, right?
The U.S. needs it from the standpoint of our being able to maintain some degree of primacy in business around the world. China's not going to want to relent to the U.S. demands on a structural change. You can't steal tech anymore. You can't demand that it be transferred. You can't subsidize your state-owned enterprises to compete against our private companies, which is unfair. China's not going to do that because it can't. It is so reliant upon that economic model. It's a 10, 20, 30-year proposition for changing that. You see, I think the market's metabolizing this notion that some kind of deal, face-saving, there'll be pageantry around it, there'll be meetings. China will say, we're going to buy a lot more of this and that. We're going to continue talks.
But they got to follow up on it, right? Now, they meet again, the two leaders, the end of February, right?
Well, Lighthizer and company are going over there earlier, right? And then at some point...
So this is after the president meets with Kim Jong-un of North Korea.
It's still, the thinking is after the Kim Jong-un meeting, he would meet with Xi Jinping, but that hasn't been confirmed yet. He said yesterday he would...
but in other words, nothing is firm and concluded until at least then.
No, but I think what would really shock the markets now is if President Trump actually went from 10 to 25% on those tariff rates. Now, I think the kind of the worst case scenario that's
they take effect March 1.
Right, but and he keeps saying that he would do it, but I think in people's minds, being investors' minds right now, the thinking is that at the worst, because of how things are progressing, that'll be pushed out. Again, to the point about time frame, is that if they don't have a deal in place, at the very least, they'll agree to some sort of an extension of the deadline. Just kind of reading between the lines.
In other words, delay the tariff effect on the $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. Right?
Tariffs hurt China, but they hurt us, and that's the problem with it.
I know we add this a lot. Governments don't pay tariffs.
Right,
people do.
We do. That's
so we feel that.
Exactly.
And then the Chinese people feel that.
Exactly.
Right?
So the only way tariffs can be used successfully is as a strategic tool. So to Connell's point and John's.
But you're a free trader. I mean, you were in Congress. Did you ever go for this nonsense?
No, and didn't have to either. I wasn't in a position.
Well, then what do you think of the president's approach to fight fire with fire?
I understand why he's doing it. He has been tougher on China.
That's not what I asked, though. Do you think that approach is wise?
I think it could be having an effect. I think it could be wise. But the wisest thing he's doing, and what I give him enormous credit for, Neil, is that he's growing our economy. That is the biggest leverage we have.
Fair argument.
With tax cuts and deregulation. That's really his
That's
tool.
a very politic answer.
But
this is why I would have liked you as a doctor. You would just tell me, Neil, you could afford to lose some weight.
Well,
it's just an idea.
It's a thought. It's a concept. No, but I agree. Tariffs, I think we should reject as much as possible.
But wouldn't that be a kicker if it works? If this approach just works?
Yes. Whether or not you feel tariffs are the right way to go, this business community, the U.S. business community, is finally around a tougher line with China because they realize what's been going on up until now is not working. Not only
that's not a right or left view. That's exactly. I've been getting really opposed view.
That's exactly.
And it's not just business. It's our allies. It's Europe. It's other nations in Asia that worry about the bullying.
The Germans and the Italians, they've been saying, go Trump, go, without publicly saying, go Trump, go.
The question is whether or not the president is now going to blink. Whether America is going to blink, whether it is going to stick with this, whether it keeps the 10% tariffs on, maybe even ratchets them up to 25%.
Well, do you think that the failure the president had, I don't mean to disparage him, on the shutdown, has now given the Chinese an idea? He blinks, we can get him to cave.
Maybe. Yeah. Yes, possibly.